Adesso chiamo sul palco la dottoressa Helene Lapierre, la quale affronterà un argomento molto più inerente alla pratica del nostro lavoro. La sua ricerca si concentra sui fattori che influenzano l'efficienza dell'utilizzo dei nutrienti per la produzione di latte attraverso una migliore conoscenza del metabolismo delle vacche da latte. E qui ho detto tutto. Good job.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Professor Clemente, for the very kind introduction. And it's really my pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. And I would like to thank EDNF Man and especially Paolo for this very kind invitation to come and discuss with you and hopefully to convince you that balancing derivations for amino acid is the next level. So when we balance as nutritionists rations on the farm, there are multiple objectives that we want to meet for the dairy producers, but also with the increased concern of the public towards the impact of animal production on the environment, we also target a reduction of nitrogen excretion. When we want to balance a ration, basically, the principle is simple. We have desired outputs, namely milk protein yield in that case, that we want to balance with an adequate supply from a diet that we will prepare, right? But to have an equation between the inputs and the outputs, what we need is to have and to have chosen units. So what should be these units? Well, to answer that question, if we look at the route of the protein that are being digested to milk protein synthesis, we have the protein arriving at the entrance here of the small intestine where they will be digested into their constitutive blocks, which are the free amino acid that will reach blood circulation through the portal vein. Then they will flow to the liver, they will go to the heart, and from there they will be distributed to all body tissues, including the mammary gland, as free amino acid. And what the mammary gland will be using, as the other tissues will be using, all these free amino acid to synthesize their own protein. So therefore, if we really want to adequately supply what's being needed by the tissues, we need to know the amino acid that will be used and what is being provided as well by the diets. So how we will go through that? Even if we want to end up with amino acid, the proteins will remain the starting points. So we'll go through how the inputs, the outputs, and the efficiency of utilization are being calculated or estimated. And then we'll see, once we have built this base on the protein, do we really need to move from proteins to amino acid? Again, going through inputs, outputs, recommendation, and we'll end up to, okay, this is kind of nice theory, but does it really work, and how can we make it work as nutritionists? So we'll go through that comparing two feed evaluation system. CNCPS, which is quite well known here, is being used a lot under two commercial licenses, NDS and AMTS. But we have to realize that the basis has been thrown, if you want, or prepared in the 90s by Charlie Sniffen in betweens. There had been major update, or I should say revision, in 2004 by Danny Fox. And then the latest published update was in 2015 by Van Amberg. And then we'll compare that with the new release of the NASEM, which is the 8th revision of the nutrient requirements of dairy cattle. This is the American guide. And basically, this is the revised version of the known NRC 2001. Because CNCPS is somewhat based on an older structure, there is some more recent knowledge on amino acid metabolism, which is not integrated into CNCPS. And as we will move through, I will tell you where it is and why it might explain some differences between CNCPS and NASEM. I think it's important to understand the basis of the model to be able to make choices and understand how we do the balance. So as I was saying, the proteins really remain the starting point. We want to define the inputs, we want to define the outputs. So the inputs, well, as we all know, in the dairy cow, this is great, we have the rumen, But this is a little bit complicating the whole thing, because what is being ingested by the cow is totally different from what will be arriving at the entrance of the small intestine and what will be digested. So this is what we want to know. What is this flow of protein which will be digested that we will refer to as metabolizable protein, or I will often use just MP. So what is this flow of protein which is arriving at the entrance of the small intestine? Well, it is mainly three fractions. We have microbial protein, which is quite important, as we've seen with Greg this morning, and Maribeth will be also talking to us about that. It represents more than 50% of the protein which will be digested by the cow. So basically, it's like all the microbes growing to the rumen that becomes a biomass that will be evacuated out of the rumen and that will serve as protein. So more than 50%. Then we have the endogenous duodenal protein. What is it? It is all along the gut. We'll have some protein that are secreted by the gut and then put into the lumen, like saliva, enzymes, mucus. The cow needs that to keep working. And this is not insignificant. It represents between 10 to 15% of the flow of protein arriving at the entrance of the small intestine. And the remainder is the dietary protein, which is not digested. So that's going to be the difference between the total and MCP and duodenal endogenous. So currently, the CNCPS version 6.5.5 does not acknowledge the presence of duodenal endogenous protein at the entrance of the small intestine. So what they consider is that all the flow of protein which is arriving is microbial plus RUP. We'll see that will have some impact on our conception later on. So, okay, that's nice. We have this knowledge that these are the three fractions. But how do the predictions from CNCPS or from NASEM, how can we compare those predictions with observed data? And we will look at the relationship through this type of graph. I just made it really simple here. So on the y-axis, we have the observed value, and the x-axis is the predicted value. If we have a perfect fit, then the mean of observed equals the mean of predicted, and we have the line of unity. But that would be nice. It's not always what we have. So if we have a mean bias, but just a sole mean bias, well, the line that we'll have here, in this case, is parallel to the line of unity. And you can see here that the mean observed is smaller than the mean predicted. So we have an overprediction, and what we call the mean bias is what's observed minus what's predicted. We can also have only a slope bias. So then in that case, we have to be careful, because sometimes we don't have a difference in the mean observed and the mean predicted, but we can see that the slope here is not unity. It's different. Here it's going to be lower than unity. So below that mean here, the observed are higher than the prediction. So there is an underprediction, and we have the opposite above the mean. And we can have both a mean and a slope bias, so not unity, and the mean observed is different from the mean predicted. So I think that will help to understand the further comparison, where we will look at what has been observed compared to what has been predicted. In addition to talking about the mean and the slope bias, we'll be presenting the CCC, or the concordance correlation coefficient. So the closer to 1, the better is the estimate. So with Martineau et al., we recovered in the literature close to more than 1,200 treatment means that were published in dairy cows. So that's either a duodenal sample or it's omasal sampling. And we looked here at what was observed again versus what's being predicted. And we can see here that CNCPS is yielding better. Well, sorry, I forgot to mention, this is post-terminal non-ammonia nitrogen. It's just like what people are doing is that they look at total protein and they remove ammonia because ammonia is kind of useless. So CNCPS has a really good CCC at 84% and no slope and no mean bias. Whereas NASEM isn't that bad with a CCC of 80%, so that's quite good. But as you can see, the slope is not equal to unity. So there was a little slope bias and also a little bit mean bias because on average it was higher. So for the total protein supply, or what's arriving at the entrance of the small intestine, both systems are doing quite well, but CNCPS was yielding higher better prediction than NASEM. But this is what's arriving at the entrance of the small intestine. What we want to know is what the cow would receive, and that will be the amount of protein which will be digested. So what we do is that we take the amount of RUP times the intestinal digestibility of each feed ingredient, that might be different, plus the microbial protein flow, the true microbial protein flow, times the intestinal digestibility. Note here that the duodenal endogenous flow does not contribute to the net supply. We can discuss that later, but due to time, just take it as that's true, trust me. Then what we did is that with another grad student, we went to the dairy herd improvement database that we have in Quebec, and he did a tremendous amount of work where we had over 500,000 individual data points from individual cows, and he looked at comparing different models. I'll show you a CNCPS and NASEM. So these were from 4 years data. Milk production at that time averaged like 28 kilos. It was from 94 to 2014, to 2018. So what we can see here is that if we look at the total supply that was predicted by CNCPS versus NASEM, we can see that the total prediction from CNCPS was higher than NASEM, and this was both from microbial source and both from RUP sources. But do not forget that in CNCPS, the duodenal endogenous secretion is somewhat implicitly included into the RUP. And then for this presentation with the work from Martineau et al., we also compared the prediction from CNCPS and the prediction from NASEM, and we can see that we had slightly higher prediction from CNCPS. We find exactly the same point as we had on the previous slide, and this here might be due again to the fact that CNCPS includes the duodenal endogenous secretion of flow in its prediction of MP. Okay, so this is for the side of the input. Now if we want to look at the output, what are the functions that the cow needs to meet that will pull amino acids out of the pool that it will not come back? It's really like a drain. So those will be accretion, growth, and gestation, secretions, because we really look at milk protein yield. This is what's interesting us. But the cow has to make other proteins, and these will be exported out of the animal, and we have also to fulfill the needs to the cows to make those proteins. So that will be scurf. This is hair, skin, hoof. The metabolic fecal protein, we've been talking about the endogenous flow at the duodenum level, but then that will continue all along the intestine. Part of that will be absorbed, but part of that will be excreted in the feces. So we need to fulfill the amino acids that are needed to support those secretions. Not really useful for us because it's in the feces, but really, really needed by the cow because enzymes, mucin, so everything that will protect the gut and ensure the function of the gut. Then milk protein yield, which is like the easiest to measure. And to that we'll also add the endogenous urinary loss. So this is what's being lost, like in basal condition, into urine. And these are not proteins. And I'll come back to that later as well. So we'll focus on the secretions here and the urinary endogenous loss. Accretions, growth, and gestation aren't that big in high-producing dairy cows in early lactation. And also very often in the papers, we do not have enough data. So if you publish paper, put that data in because we don't have information on the stage of gestation and if the animals are growing or not. So if we look from this study from Bingley at the average net protein output calculated by NASEM or calculated by CNCPS, we can see that scurf like hoof skin, that is very small. Urinary endogenous loss and metabolic fecal protein, in NASEM we went through a revised calculation, and you can see that it had a major impact on urinary endogenous loss and MFP. Actually, endogenous urinary loss increased a lot, MFP decreased, and actually with this revision here, we're quite close to the estimation that were done in the INRA 2018. So this was the input, that was the output, but we want to link the two together. And how do we link the two together is that I have these desired outputs, with which efficiency will be the cow using the inputs, so that will tell me how much inputs I will need to put in. And this is the efficiency of utilization of MP, that I will refer to as efficiency of MP, which basically is the sum of the outputs divided by the sum of the input. So if we just reorganize the equation here, we can come with recommendation. I have the desired outputs divided by the efficiency of each system. I can calculate how much inputs I need to put in my diet to fulfill the needs that I want to have with my cows. CNCPS and NASEM are both using a factorial approach. So we have each of the functions that we've seen before: SCURF, urinary endogenous, and MFP, milk protein yield, and when we want to account for them, gestation and growth. And what we do is that we take each function divided by its efficiency of utilization. So in CNCPS, we have SCURF, urinary endogenous, and milk protein yield that have an efficiency of 67, and metabolic fecal that has an efficiency of 1. In NASEM, we have chosen to give an efficiency, the same efficiency to metabolic fecal protein and milk protein yield, because we just figured out that these were protein synthesis, and because of amino acid metabolism, the efficiency would very likely be the same, whatever the protein synthesis is. However, for urinary endogenous loss, as I mentioned, these are not proteins. We term them protein, and we put them into the protein requirement, but what they are really, these are catabolic pathways of utilization of amino acids. So if you have X amount being catabolized, you will find X amount into the urine as well. So we just gave an efficiency of 1. So if we look from the paper of Bingali, so remember, those are commercial herds that diets were balanced by nutritionists, and it's like over 500,000 data. Then the recommendation for SCURF, milk protein yield slightly lower for NASEM because we had higher efficiency. And the fact that the efficiency was 67 here, 1 here, so that somewhat decreased the difference between the recommendations and the net output. This is for urinary endogenous, and here for the metabolic fecal protein. So if we sum all of these recommendations here, again, this is an average, we see that the recommendations are slightly higher for NASEM, for CNCPS, than for NASEM. But what is important is that we fit things within the same model. So if we look at the MP supply that we've seen before, and we compare what was the supply compared to what are the recommendations, on those herds, we were roughly even using NRC, I'm always with NRC, using CNCPS or using NASEM. We can also use the efficiency for something else. We can use the efficiency to predict the output. If I know the input of my diet, I know the efficiency that will be used by the model, then I can calculate what is the output, and like SCURF and MFP, they are predicted by the system, by the feed system, so we can predict milk protein yield. So if we calculate the milk protein yield that was predicted by CNCPS or by NASEM, CNCPS currently is using a fixed factor. I know that's going to be changed in version 7, but currently it's using a fixed factor of 67, except MFP at 1. Whereas from NASEM, we went for an approach with a multivariate equation that I will be describing in the next slide. And we also proposed something that is not in the book of NASEM, but later on we published a paper where we can predict the efficiency of utilization of MP and use that to back calculate milk protein yield, a little bit like it's done in the Nord4 system, the Scandinavian system. So if we look at the multivariate equation from NASEM, we can see that it is based not on MP, but I put it here so we have all the data together, but it is based on the supply of 5 essential amino acids. So the digestive flow, histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, and methionine, the sum of all the other amino acids. Then we have the square sum of histidine square, lysine, so the 5 that we use, this is the sum of the 5 squared. And the reason why we have a square term is that we reach a maximum. It's not like a straight line, like when you have a fixed efficiency. Then we have the impact of the digestible energy intake, which was positive. Sorry, I forgot to mention, I didn't want to flood you with numbers, so I just put the signs here. So we have a positive effect of the digestible energy intake. We had a negative effect of the digestible NDF that was in the equation centered on the mean, and a negative effect of body weight also centered on the mean. I think what was interesting too in the approach that was used in NASEM is that the coefficients that you will see in the book for the equation, when you run the model, these coefficients are changed depending on what we call the rolling herd average of the protein yield on a 305-day basis. So as a nutritionist, when you get into the balancing the diet, you enter what is the rolling herd average, or for the herd, or for the group that you're balancing. And that will change the coefficient so that it will increase the maximum. And so that's referring at what Prof. Clemente was saying earlier, is that we're using data of the past to build models, but that we want to use for cows of the future. So that was one way to adapt to what would be the potential. That would be environment, that would be management, that would be genetic selection, that will improve the capacity of the cows to make more milk, that will be integrated into this calculation. The other way to calculate with NASEM, actually, it is, we developed equations to predict the efficiency of utilization of MP, which are based on the supply of MP divided by the supply of digestible energy intake, linear term, square term, and we also introduced this in milk. And this is giving this type of curve, so we can see that as we increase the ratio, we decrease the efficiency. So if we increase MP supply, or if we decrease the energy, we will increase the ratio, so we'll be less efficient. I know a lot of people don't really like ratio. Statisticians do not like ratio, but that was really the best fit we could get. So if we look at what was observed versus what was predicted, again, we have the observed on the y-axis and the predicted on the x-axis. We have CNCPS had a CCC of 66, and we had a fairly obvious slope bias. And this is with the study from Bengali, so with the dairy herd improvement data cow. NASEM MV, we didn't have any bias, but we didn't have a really good CCC at 69. And with what we call the Helene Lapierre, which is the predicted efficiency, we didn't have any mean bias, slope bias, and had quite a good CCC. Then we repeated the exercise with the data that we had in Martineau et al., where we had studies where the flow of the digester was being measured, and we get pretty much the same picture. We have a mean bias with CNCPS. This is not surprising. All the models that are using a fixed efficiency at low, here not low supply, but low area, we have a under prediction, and at high area, we have an over prediction. NASEM MV, we had a good CCC here, but lower than CNCPS. And this time NASEM, it was giving quite a good CCC, but we had a slight slope bias. So basically, when we want to predict the milk protein yield, the variable efficiency of utilization of MP really better reflects the biology. We have, with a fixed efficiency, we have a slope bias, and this is not typical to CNCPS. All the older models using a fixed efficiency will have this slope bias in their prediction of milk protein yield. However, NASEM multivariate had quite low CCC, so we think that for now, the efficiency of utilization predicted with the equations that we propose in this 2023 paper was the option giving the better option to predict milk protein yield. Okay, you'll say, well, Helene, that's quite interesting, you've convinced us about MP and models and everything. But if I have a good idea of the MP that I'm giving, do I really need to move from MP to individual amino acid? Because this is really the major point. And the comparison, it's very simplistic, but the comparison I really like to use is to compare the letters to amino acid and the words to protein. So in the ABC, we have 26 letters. With the 26 letters, we can write all the words, we can write all the books, all the guides, and everything. The same thing, with the 20 amino acid, the cows can make all the proteins. Would it be meal, would it be enzymes, would it be hormones, doesn't matter. But you cannot replace one letter by another letter when you write a word. It is a mistake. The same thing, you cannot replace an amino acid by another amino acid when you make a protein. Otherwise, it won't be functional. And this is a very simple example, again, very simplistic. But if you play Scrabble, I don't know if you play Scrabble in Italy, where you have words and letters and you try to make words. Well, if I give you like a bunch of letters and you don't tell me what you want, and I give you whatever I find. Well, in this example here, I've been asking you to write casein with the letters I've been giving you. You were able to write 2 times casein, and you have a bunch of letters that you can't use anymore because you cannot write more words, more times the word casein. So in the cow, all those letters or amino acid would just be catabolized to urea and excreted into urine. But if I know what you need, and I give you 2 more A, that's not a lot, just 2 more A, then you can write twice as much casein, and then the leftovers is only what's being here. So very simplistic, but this is the basis of balancing the amino acids. So if we come back to initial question, if you know how much MP you have, do you know how much amino acid you have? So we went back to the data from Martineau et al. Don't forget, it has like over 1,200 data. If you look at the lysine content as a proportion of MP, on average we had 8.2%, but it did vary from 5.7 to 10.1. Similarly, for methionine, it averaged 2.4, but it varied from 1.9 to 3.3. What it means is that if you know how much MP you're giving, you do not have a clue of how much lysine you're giving, you do not have a clue of how much methionine the cow is receiving. So how do we define the amount of amino acid being delivered? Well, we had the first good step done, where we had the flow of the different protein being supplied to the animal. Then we just go one step further, and we give an amino acid composition to the RUP fraction, which is currently the amino acid composition of the feed ingredient that are composing the RUP fraction. We give an amino acid composition to the microbial fraction, and we give an amino acid composition to the endogenous dural flow. That we can compare with observed value. Before we get there, I just wanted to show you why we might have such a large variation in the duodenal flow of amino acid. We have here 3 amino acids, histidine, lysine, and methionine. I put in blue the milk. I put in brown the microbial protein. It's quite important. We've seen that it's more than 50% of the protein supply that comes from the microbes. Then typical feed ingredients, core grain, soybean meal, and canola meal. In the next slide, what I did is that I compare for each amino acid the supply with the lowest composition relative to milk. We know that corn is low in lysine. So corn grain has only 39% of lysine composition of milk. Methionine in soybean meal, we know soybean meal, it's not a big surprise, but you know that soybean meal has is low in methionine. So here in this case, only 49%. These were compositions from NASEM, which are quite similar to those from CNCPS, actually. The important thing, and we'll come back to that, because we've always been told that microbes, they have a good amino acid profile. But look at histidine. The microbes only have 75% of the amino acid, of the histidine content of milk. So that might create a problem when we have diet with a lot of microbial protein. So if we come back to our initial point, see how good are the predictions from CNCPS and NASEM compared to what is being observed. So this is really what has been measured. So we don't have as much studies as we had for total nitrogen, but still we had like over 300 treatment means. So we have again the CCC, the mean and slope bias indicated if they are present. So we see here we will have NASEM here, and the second row will have CNCPS. And we can see that there was it's a combination of mean and slopes. That means no sleep bias, no slope bias, no mean bias for histidine with NASEM, but there was a fairly obvious mean and slope bias for CNCPS. For lysine, there was a mean bias, but no slope bias for NASEM, so we can see that it were all over-predictive. And for CNCPS, we still had a mean and a slope bias. And for methionine, the same thing, we didn't have any mean or slope bias for NASEM, but we had quite a severe mean and slope bias for CNCPS. So overall, the predictions of the outflow of amino acid were much better with NASEM than with CNCPS. It was quite a surprise for us because the total protein, or the total nitrogen, was better with CNCPS. We have a few hypotheses, and we've been discussing that with people involved in the development, and hopefully things will improve in the version 7.0, but I haven't seen the data yet. So now this is what's appearing at the entrance of the small intestine. What I need to know is how much will be digested. So the same exercise as we did for proteins. So we have the RUP fraction times the intestinal digestibility. We have the microbial fraction times the intestinal digestibility. And again, the duodenal endogenous fraction does not contribute to net MP supply. So if we go to the study from Bingali et al. Here, and if we compare as a proportion of MP, we see that histidine was having a higher prediction with CNCPS, a slightly higher prediction with NASEM for lysine, and slightly higher for CNCPS for methionine. With NASEM here, we have more and more indication that this NASEM release actually had an overprediction of the lysine flow. So I was trying to remove slides. I removed one too much, but for the outputs, we do the same exercise. It's the amount of protein in accretion of SCRV, MFP, milk protein yield, urinary endogenous loss that we multiply by their respective amino acid composition. So we're going to get the net output. Now, once we have the inputs and the outputs, how do we get to recommendation? NASEM and CNCPS are using a factorial approach, but I thought I really needed to talk a short, brief sentence on the proportional approach, because this is really what has driven the implementation of balancing diet for amino acid. NRC, INRA, NOR4 are still using it. So rather than having recommendation in grams per day of amino acid, it's recommendation of lysine and methionine mainly as a proportion of MP. But it doesn't take into account the fact that the proportion of essential to MP varies with the diet, and it has fixed recommendation no matter what is milk production. And I think that we're far better to use a factorial approach, which is what's being used by CNCPS and NASEM. So basically, still maths again, we have the protein output times the amino acid composition, and then we divide by the associated efficiency. So we have here the recommendations are the outputs divided by the efficiency of utilization. We have the efficiency of utilization proposed by CNCPS, by NASEM, which we call the target efficiencies. They're slightly different, but I think this is for a lot of historical reasons. And just to specify here that as for NP, urinary endogenous in NASEM as an efficiency of 1, MFP in CNCPS as an efficiency of 1 as well. I know that CNCPS also proposes recommendations that are based on the ratio of gram of NP per megacal of ME. I think this is quite good if you have the right amount of energy. If your amount of energy is not correct, I think this ratio is pulling you in the wrong direction. But I'll not get into that. I'll get to that. So recommendation for the flow of digestible amino acid, or you can ask question after, or metabolizable amino acid. Well, due to the difference that we've seen in the inputs and the outputs, I think that we see between the system, recommendations must be defined within each system. You cannot take the efficiency recommended by NASEM and put it into CNCPS predictions. We really need to stay within each system. And unfortunately, so far, we cannot really compare the system on their ability to do the recommendations because milk protein yield is not predicted based on these recommendations. So, does it work? Said it's fine, nice concept, nice biological concept, but does it really work? I'd like to begin with a proof of concept. We know that if we infuse animals, or if you infuse the cows, with amino acid, then it's easier to make big differences between amino acid supply. But I think this is really making the point. This is a study from Dolman et al. The cows were fed a low-protein diet. They had 5 treatments. They were infused with saline, which means that they received no amino acid. They were infused with a complete mixture of amino acid, essential amino acid that was covering 100% of the requirement. They were infused this mixture with no histidine, this mixture with no methionine, and this mixture with no phenylalanine. And if we look at the data, what we can see, when the animals did not receive any supplementation, they were only infused with saline. If we calculate the efficiency of utilization of amino acid, and we compare that with the target efficiency from NASEM, what we can see is that all these efficiencies were higher than the target efficiencies. It's a little bit counterintuitive. Sometimes we think, okay, the more efficient I am, the better I am. But in this case, you cannot be efficient to the extreme. Like, you cannot ask the animal to be efficient at more than 100%. No system even works at 100% efficiency. So what does the cow do when you ask her to work at a higher efficiency that she can do? Well, she just decreases its milk production. And this is what she did, actually, because if we compare with when the cows were infused with essential amino acids, you can see that milk protein yield increased from 800 grams to close to 1,000 grams, and then the efficiency of each amino acid was lower than the target efficiency. This is not what you would like neither if you balance a diet, because it means that you're giving too much of it. But if we look at what happened if we remove histidine, you can see that the efficiency of all the other amino acids was below the target efficiency. But the efficiency of histidine was way above the target efficiency. In this case, we would like the cow to work at a 121% efficiency. She can't do that. So what she did, it decreased its milk production. And if you look at it the other way around, if you give back histidine into the mixture, then it just increases milk production. For the sake of time, I won't go through all the calculation for MET and for phi, but we get exactly the same pattern. No MET, efficiency is higher than the target efficiency, milk production decreases. No phi, the efficiency is larger than the target efficiency, milk protein decrease. What is interesting, phi is a bit peculiar, because you can see that 73% is higher than the target efficiency. But for this amino acid, and we don't totally understand why, but the target efficiency is lower than it is for the other amino acids. Then you say, well, it's nice because then you have the milk production, so you can calculate what is the efficiency. can we, with a diet, be able to estimate what would be the efficiency? Then we come back to this paper that we published where we had the predicted efficiency of NP. We also have the predicted efficiency of essential amino acids. And then you don't know milk protein yield. What you know is the composition of your diet, and again with the ratio of the amino acid supply to digestible energy intake, linear, square, and days in milk. If you calculate the predicted efficiency, you get exactly the same pattern. So you only knew the diet, but then I can say that for this treatment here, histidine was limiting. The other treatment, it was methionine. The other treatment, it was phenylalanine. But this is with infusion, so we somewhat exacerbate the difference. Does it work with feeding studies? So years ago, with Alex Christophe, we had a study, and remember, we didn't have the tools, all the tools that we have now. So the idea was, can we reduce the NP supply and give rumen-protected lysine and rumen-protected methionine and restore milk protein yield? So we had the first study where we had a deficient diet, we had an adequate NP diet, as we can see here. We had a deficient diet to which we added rumen-protected lysine, and a deficient diet to which we added rumen-protected lysine and methionine. What did happen is that it did not restore milk protein yield, and then we began to say, okay, it should have been working because we had everything that we thought should be working, but we had taken blood samples, and when we have a look at the concentrations, the concentration of histidine were about half in the deficient NP diet. And if we looked at the deficient NP diet with rumen-protected lysine, well, the methionine concentration only decreased by 10 to 15%. And the efficiency of utilization, we couldn't calculate that at that time, but now if we calculate this efficiency of histidine, it's way above the target efficiency. So we repeated the study. Then we had an adequate NP diet, a deficient NP diet, and we had access to rumen-protected histidine. But we repeated the treatment with rumen-protected lysine and methionine. Again, it was not effective. It slightly increased this time milk protein yield, but not at the level of total of the adequate diet. Again, the plasma concentration of histidines were real low, and the efficiency of histidine was also way above the target efficiency. We had another treatment where we added rumen-protected histidine plus lysine plus methionine, and then it totally restored dry matter intake and milk protein yield with efficiencies that were along the target. So, in conclusions, so I think, sorry, I forgot to finish with that. So what this is telling us too is that the deficient NP diet were diets that were low in protein. So it means that when we have diets low in protein, that a large proportion of the supply is coming from microbial protein, we need to keep an eye on histidine because, as we've seen, histidine concentration in the microbes is low. So in conclusions, if we want to predict milk protein yield, we really have to move to a variable efficiency. And so far, the predicted efficiencies from the paper we published was giving the best estimation of milk protein yield. For the recommendation of essential amino acid, well, they are propositioned by NASEM and CNCPS, but due to differences within each system, we have to remain within each system. We can identify potential limitation not only of lysine, methionine, histidine, of all the essential amino acids with the predicted deficiencies or the observed deficiencies relative to what's being proposed in CNCPS. Then, if we want to balance on the farm, and I'll finish with that, what we can do is we can have a look and decrease the crude protein, maintaining NP if possible, and even reducing NP if we have a good balance in amino acid. We need to make sure we have enough energy, enough RDP, and then if the essential amino acid supply is below recommendation, or if the target is if the efficiency is above the target proposed by NASEM, then we can look to select complementary feeds or to look if there is an option or profitability to use rumen-protected amino acids. We have to, here I won't go through that, but if we decide to reduce MP, we have to keep in mind that we're reducing the safety margin, and as such, everything in the management needs to be really tidy. And looking at urea consumption into milk, and I think that with that, we have all the tools to go to the next step and balance our dairy rations for individual amino acids. On that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Helene.
Thank you.
So, ho due domande per la professoressa. I say in English, what are your thoughts on adjusting amino acid requirements as a proportion of metabolized energy?
Yeah, I had just a word on that. I've not been working with. I've not been working on looking at the at the recommendations made by CNCPS, where they have grams of MP per gram of per megacal of ME. I think, as I was saying, if you have the right amount of energy, that will work. But what we have seen in the curve that I've shown you is that if we increase, or if we increase, if I go the other way around, if I decrease, because it's going to be more efficient in terms of example, if I decrease the amount of energy, right, then I will be decrease the amount of energy. I will be increasing the ratio. If I increase the ratio of MP on DE, no, I'm going the other way around. But the fact is that the efficiency of utilization of amino acid changes with the energy supply. So if I reduce the amount of energy, then if I want to have the good ratio, I would be, okay, then I also reduce the amount of amino acid. But then if I have reduced the amount of energy, I'm less efficient. If I want to keep the same ratio, I'm saying I'm going to reduce the amount of amino acid. I cannot be in a system where I'm less efficient, and to get the same result, I will just reduce also the amount of amino acid. It should be the other way around. So I think this recommendation will be fine as long as the ME supply is absolutely perfect. I'm better on drawing, so if the person wants to come to see me, I like to make little drawing on that afterwards.
Seconda domanda. Cosa ne pensa della supplementazione di catene di aminoacidi ramificati? Branched chain amino acid.
I think we have to be careful because it really depends on the diet that we are feeding. I think that in America we had a lot of diet with corn, and corn is really, really rich in leucine, for example. So the likelihood that we're going to miss some branch chain is very limited. But I know that there had been some work done. If there is no corn, more like European type diet, especially in the north, then leucine might be short. But I think what's great with the NASEM approach is that each amino acid can be analyzed individually. Of course, I think we need to get out of our silos because the branch chain will interact with each other. It will interact with energy. But I think that just in terms of the branch chain amino acids, in terms of the branch chain amino acid supply, it might not be needed. If the question goes, do we need more branch chain amino acid to make more branch chain VFAs to promote a microbial growth, because that might be the question, that I've not been doing any work to see how much would be needed, but it's possible that if we don't have enough branch chain VFAs, that it might be a limitation for microbial growth, but how do we estimate that? And, well, I've been talking a bit with Greg about that yesterday as well, and we've seen so far that currently the prediction from CNCPS of the amino acid, there is quite a big slope bias, so I would be really aware if I'm doing work on that basis. to try to get as much as I could the best prediction of what would be the branch chain amino acid supply.
Grazie, thank you professor. Facciamo un applauso e ringraziamo la professoressa.